So even more relevant example would be those that are in literal fight or flight. You get military people that end up in a firefight, and they have to manage that fight or flight, but still think tactically and still be able to make quick decisions. And so they'll teach some of the strategies that we're going to talk about are ones that I've heard the military uses as well. You could actually confirm if they taught you like the tactical breathing, things like that, as a way to keep control of your amygdala, not let it run the show. So the reason why we have this anxiety, we're going back to this pattern. Part of the reptilian complex is that little amygdala, the little inner meerkat that thinks that interviewer is a man-eating tiger. And it's that meerkat that it's doing you a favor most of the time, but you want to make sure that it's not steering the ship. You want to make sure it's not sitting in the interview. You want to be in the interview, not your meerkat. And like we pointed out before, it can be a tricky balance because as activity increases in one, it decreases in the other, and how to find that and manage that balance. So to come up with some strategies for this, let's look first at where anxiety shows in ourselves. It's going to show itself in a few different ways. It's going to show in our body language, so we're going back to that a little bit. It's going to show in our breathing, and very much is part of our mindset and how we see the world and as we see the opportunities. So let's look at the body language one first. You guys are getting pretty well versed with this, but what does anxious body language look like? Looks like that.
It looks pretty anxious.
It looks like this. It looks like this. It looks like all these pictures that you guys have already seen is what anxious body language looks like. And we know that confident body language is just the opposite. We've seen tons of examples of this. But here's the key. Body language is a two-way street. What we feel shows in our body language, but what we do with our body language and with our expressions affects how we feel as well. And so if we know what anxious body language looks like, we know what the self-soothing, all that kind of stuff, do something different, do something expansive, do something powerful, and that's going to help temper that anxiety. It's going to make you feel a little bit better. Look better and feel better just by adjusting your body language. Anxious breathing, what do we do when we're nervous with our breathing? Shallow breath. We may hold our breath, or we may breathe shallow and rapid. And what does soothing breathing look like when you're meditating? It's like slow and relaxed. There's a difference to that. Next time you're nervous or anxious, see what that difference is. Yes?
Before you start that one, I was watching this show the other day. It's based on, was kids that deal with anxiety and how to curb that behavior. It was talking about doing that soothing breath, and I've used it a little bit lately as I felt anxious. They specifically talk about having your head down and inhaling, keeping your head up, holding it for a minute, and then exhaling and bringing it back down to a neutral space. And just that action of the head kind of brings more openness, makes you feel more confident while you're trying to slow your breath and kind of control your breathing to control your anxiety. Also doing that. So as your primitive brain, you can't kind of always understand all those things. Being able to nod your head as you're breathing really kind of brings that thought process more forward.
Namaste.
Namaste.
I like that too because it's still body language. Open it up. Yeah, so if anxious is shallow, meditative, calm breathing is slow and deep. This is Dr. Daniel Amen. He's well known for doing brain scans. He's done probably 100,000 brain scans on people's brains and seeing where activity is. And somewhat earlier, or probably mid-career, he was invited to go on CNN. And he was pretty nervous and anxious because this was his first time on a major news network. And so he's sitting there in the back room waiting to go on, and he's getting super nervous. And then that little voice in his head starts teasing him, making fun of him, saying,
"You're going to forget your name."
Exactly, and it was saying, "You treat people that have this problem." And now you have it. And so we're going to talk about some of the things he did for himself before he went on, but one of them, the very first thing he did was to start breathing. And just calm your breath and focusing on your breathing. That's going to help you feel calmer when you're in fight or flight. There's tons of different versions of this. When people talk about meditation, there's going to be some element to breathing. The tactical breathing that I've read, there's Wim Hof has a breathing thing. Tons of them out there. You pick one that works. But the principle is deliberately try to pay attention and slow down your breathing. And that has a powerful effect. The shallow breathing invokes a sympathetic response, a fight or flight response, and the slow breathing gets a parasympathetic to calm your nervous system.
And sometimes, on a personal note, when I'm breathing, on the exhale, will let my vocal cords go. So I can, and you get kind of this noise coming from it. To me, that's my anxiety coming out, and because I'm getting it out of my body by pushing it out through my out breath. So I don't feel it anymore. There's science behind it, but kind of that vocalizing kind of makes it easier for me to calm down my anxiety.
Awesome. So that's the second tip for anxiety is to slow your breathing. And as she was saying, that breathing out through your vocal cords, when we are nervous, if we're holding our breath, then our vocal cords get tight, and so our voice tends to get a little squeakier and higher. I remember when I was doing some door-to-door work, and my trainer that was with me told me to stop sounding like Mickey Mouse. And I was like, I didn't know I sounded like Mickey Mouse. But it's because I was nervous, and vocal cords were tightened, and so I sounded squeaky. To combat that, breathe again. And if you speak on the out-breath, it naturally lowers your voice tone to a comfortable range for you. Margaret Thatcher realized that as a woman in politics, she wanted to be seen as credible and to get respect and authority. But with her higher voice, she was afraid she wouldn't be seen as credible. So she went and got voice coaching to try to lower her voice to sound more confident. And there's YouTube videos where you can hear the before and after. And there's a stark difference in her voice. We don't necessarily have to get voice training, but just that breathing on the out breath lowers your voice down to sound more confident. Anxious mindset's the third thing. This is probably the trickiest one to deal with, but might be the most important. What's going on up in here that's making you so anxious?
This one's one of my favorites.
You know that little voice in your head that's always talking? And if you just asked yourself, what voice? It's that voice. Okay? We all have this voice in our head, this constant dialogue that's just chattering all the time. And have you noticed that more often than not, it's not really a friend of yours? Maybe you're different, but does it ever seem like it's a cheerleader? Like, hey, you're going to go into this interview, you're going to nail it because you're awesome and you know what you're doing. More often than not, it's like, oh man, I hope I don't screw up. I don't know if I'm up for this. The imposter syndrome is all about this kind of mindset. I don't feel like I really can do this kind of a thing. Am I the only one, or is that kind of what your inner thoughts like too? Okay. That little voice is probably never going to go away. But there's strategies to have it have less power. Going back to Daniel Amen's experience when he's about to go on CNN, after he did his breathing, the next thing he did was to write down every negative thought that was popping into his head. And there were some funny ones like, I'm going to forget my name when I go on the stage. And he listed a whole bunch of them. Some of them were hilarious. And getting it out of your head on paper has a couple of cool effects. One is, while it's up in here, while it's all just inner dialogue, it sounds more rational and it sounds more reasonable than if you get it out on paper. It's almost like you're shining a spotlight on it, and you can more easily see how absurd it is. He said, forget my name. I've never forgot my name, and even if I did, they know my name. They invited me here. So it was an absurd thought from that little voice in his head. But once he got it out on paper, he could shine a light on it. And the next part of it was to talk back to those thoughts. Talk back like a teenager would to its parents and challenge it. That makes you no longer a victim of those thoughts. It puts you in control to challenge them and fight back with them.